just hoping that when you get to the final test, you're going to pass. It would be nice to have some tests before that to know you're actually progressing, you're learning this stuff, so you don't just go in and fail the final test and then now you got to start over, right? So it's important that we evaluate, just like it's important that we quiz and test, so we understand our progress. Because when we understand our progress, it helps us work harder or stay more focused. For just guessing our progress, you know, like I think I'm really doing well here. I think this is getting better, but we haven't tested it. Then we're kind of guessing, and then what if we're wrong? What are the chances we are wrong? Probably a pretty good chance we're wrong. So that's going to affect how we get better, right? So you understand, you're in a system here. Just like school, you could come into this system, you could not show up for class, you could not study, you could not apply what you're learning because of that, and you get a bad result, you could fail, you could flunk out. Same thing happens here, you know? So if you don't apply yourself, you'll probably get a poor result, and you'll probably just flunk yourself. You'll just get so frustrated you quit. That's when you flunk yourself, right? So you really want to, if you want to do well at this, you really got to learn it and apply it and constantly evaluate yourself and keep yourself on track and do your best to apply as best you can. And we're here to help. So we really come in when you're struggling to apply the system and you tell us why you're struggling. Like, hey, I'm really stuck on this one thing, right? We're there to help, okay? Ideally, I want to see you guys take it, the bull behind the horn, or by the horns, really take the responsibility yourself to do the work, to apply it, to follow through, not using us to do that, using us as when you get stuck. So really show that, hey, ultimately, if I do this really well, I don't need TopVelocity. I don't need Coach Brent. Because I have the system right there and I can follow through. Therefore, I can do it wherever I am. I can get better wherever I go, right? That would be ideal. That's what we want for you to become the coach. And the more you learn, the better you learn, the better you apply it, and then you definitely are not going to need that much help with it because you're doing well following through. So that's the goal. But understand too that you will probably be taking this kind of a system into an organization that maybe doesn't understand these systems or believe in these systems, and you'll have those dynamics and issues, right? Be kind of like if you take a lot of empirical evidence around a lot of anecdotal evidence, sometimes they butt heads, right? Like we talked about the glove pulling. And sometimes there's a personality behind that, like a coach, and they don't like that. So you might have to keep it kind of hidden, right, to avoid the conflict. But you will be in the point where it's going to challenge you. Do I give up on this, or do I go back to this coach's anecdotal information? You'd probably be caught in that position a lot. For me personally, I would never do that. I would always stay in the science and do my best to politically use it around a coach without pissing the coach off, right? But it is tough. It's like a slippery slope. A lot of this 2 days is just going to be us going through a lot of these core principles. And you got to understand that the reason we all can sit here and work on the same things, because there's a lot of similarities in who we are and how we play this game. Would anyone agree that there's a lot of similarities in how we all play this game? What do you think those similarities are? Give me some of those similarities that we all do when we play this game. Yeah, we got to throw strikes. We got to perform well in the same aspect, right? Let's get more specific. Like as pitchers, what are some of the similarities we do on that mound? What are some of the things we do on that mound that's very much the same or similar to all of us?
Drive your legs.
We got to use our legs. Okay. What else we got to do on that mound? Similar. Yeah, we're gonna probably cock our arm, move our arms very similar. Why is that? Why are we gonna find a lot of similarities in the mechanics to the point where the science is saying, yeah, every single high velocity pitcher is doing something very similar, like hip to shoulder separation? How is that happening? What allows us to do things the same and get the same result? What allows that, or get similar results? Which establishes these core principles. What's allowing that? Why is it happening that way? Why isn't it everything's different? Like he uses his legs, it works for him. Every time I use my legs, they don't work. Why are we able to, more than likely, the majority of us get better at using our legs, we all get better? Why is that happening? No. Well, what really makes us the same? It's pretty obvious. It's kind of silly obvious. What? Yeah. Structurally, we all have what? Yeah, like what? We have two legs, right? It's that simple. We all have like two legs. You're right on it. We have two arms, torso, head, toes, foot, right? Joints pretty much move the same. So we all have this very similar anatomy, right? So that's what's happened is through time, we've all figured out there's really only a few ways we can move this anatomy to get 100 miles an hour out of our hand, period. That's why if you go back to the beginning of baseball, you saw these everybody just all over the place with their deliveries. Yeah, but the velocities were really low. Now that we've all pushed these really high velocities, it's made more of our deliveries similar because there's not many variables that we can go through to get to 100 miles an hour out of the hand, right? So that's why we're getting more similar. And the studies are showing that, right? But there is differences, right? There is differences in what makes us pitchers, right? Would y'all agree? What are those differences? What things make us we know what makes us the same. What makes us different? Height. So you might be taller than the other guy. What else? Well, not even mechanically. I don't even want to go mechanically because a lot of the things that make us different is what creates slight differences in the mechanics. So we know height makes us different. What else? Weight, tightness, like mobility, right? A lot of things we measure. Some guys have tighter tissue than the other guys. Some guys are heavier than the other guys. Some guys are slower. Some guys are faster. Okay? So those are our differences. The similarities are we have the same, pretty much an identical system with the subtle differences of how that system functions, right? And the size and the length and the mass of that system. Okay, so you think because we're the same with these subtle differences, do you think our training is going to be in the same format? Meaning our training is going to be the same with subtle differences? Or is our training going to be, no, completely different for everybody? If we're all trying to get the same elite results. Should the training be the same with subtle differences, or should it be just completely different for everybody? Shouldn't it be, right? If we're all the same with subtle differences, shouldn't the training be the same? Meaning, shouldn't we all be working on mobility? Shouldn't we all be working on strength, speed, power, motor control, sequencing, correct movements, pitching mechanics? We should all be working on this same format, right? Across the board. Okay? Where are the subtle differences in the training?
You're better at that thing than someone else.
So maybe you don't have to work on as much mobility as he needs to work on. Or maybe you got to work on more, you need to put more effort in your strength work, and he needs to put more effort in his speed work. You're still working on these things. You're just going to put more focus on it because you're struggling a little bit more in it, or you need a little bit more of it than he needed, right? So that'd be the differences. Same format for everybody, just subtle differences. When do you think that working on those differences become more important? in the beginning phase of your training or the more elite phase of your training? What? Right. Like, I even forgot my own question. So the beginning phase is where we should work on, no, the end phase, I'm wrong. We should be working on the subtle difference more at the end. Why more at the end than in the beginning? Yeah, because in your base, you've just got to get everything applied, right? You just need to start applying the strength, the mobility, the speed, the power, the motor control. And you're learning it, so it's a time to where you don't need to be thinking advanced. You need to be thinking just on that base level, on that basic level of how well am I applying each component of this overall format that we all need to get better at. And then as you started to build more proficiencies in that training, now you can start getting a little bit more focused on the specific differences, right? So a lot of people always come to me and they're like, can we customize this specific for me? Yeah, eventually. Yeah, definitely. Not right now, because you don't even do enough strength training. You don't even do enough power development. You don't even do enough mobility work. So it would be silly to customize when you don't even do half this stuff, right? Customization comes when you start to hone something down to a very elite aspect of it, right? All right, so understand that. I'm trying to give you the foundation of, as you go through the system, how it works. Because up front, guys, if you can't put your head around this whole process and where you are and then where you need to be and then what gets you there, then you're going to be lost the whole time. You'll be like, why am I doing this? What is this for? Do I really need this? Am I wasting my time? Am I not putting in enough time? What's going on? You don't want to be in your training asking those kind of questions. You want to be in your training knowing exactly what you're doing and where you're trying to go. So today you got a good understanding of how you evaluated in this system, where you stood amongst the elite levels. Now you kind of know where you are, right? How well are you going to climb the mountain? The mountain's super foggy and you can't see up or down. How well are you going to climb the mountain? Especially if you think you're already at the top and you haven't even started. How well are you going to climb that mountain when you think you're at the top? Or you think you're more than halfway and you're not? How well are you going to climb that mountain? Right? You're going to give out because you're going to set an expectation that's wrong, and then what's going to happen when you meet the expectation and you're not there? What are you going to do? You're going to get pissed off and quit. You're going to be like, well, this doesn't work, and you were probably right there. So it's really helpful to be very clear on where you are and where the finish line is. That really helps, right? If anything, wouldn't you rather under or overestimate the journey, the process, the struggle? Wouldn't you rather overestimate it than under? Right? What do you think people mainly do most of the time? Do you think they typically overestimate what it takes to throw 95, or they underestimate what it takes to throw 95? What? Considerably, my experience, and that's an anecdotal experience, they consistently underestimate, like insignificantly, like it's laughable on my end how much they underestimate it, right? They make it sound like it's really easy. You know, I used to in camp, I used to go, okay, now we'll try it here, let's see what happens. Probably as I kind of set you up. So, what do you think it takes? I know you're probably not a swimmer. Are you a swimmer? If you wanted to be in the Olympics in 4 years and make the Olympics as a swimmer, how many hours a day are you going to train to give yourself the best chance? You think 3 to 4 hours a day of training is going to get you in the Olympics in 4 years?
That's probably not right.
How many hours a day you think an Olympic swimmer trains every day? What do you think? Probably 68. So if an Olympic trainer trains 68, it's probably realistic that someone who doesn't swim is going to do even better with 3 to 4, right? How many hours a day are you going to train? You're already going to have to, right? You want it 4 years. Let's get to the big leagues in 4 years. How many hours a day are you going to train to get to the big leagues in 4 years? It throws you off. A lot of kids that just blurt it out will say 1 to 2. They'll say swimming, on average, I hear guys say 6 to 8. But the moment I go to baseball, it's 1 to 2 hours. It's it's like consistent every time I do it. And people, I'm like, do you really think getting to the big leagues is much easier than becoming an Olympic swimmer? Probability-wise, it's probably very close. But I think we have that impression, especially in the sport, that it's way easier than it is, right? You think it's hard to get to the big leagues? How many people have gotten to the big leagues in history? What? No, it's more than that. It was over 20,000, yeah. Only 20,000, that's ridiculous. I didn't get there. So that's how hard it is to get to that level. And think about it, a lot of guys, I mean, if you're a starting pitcher at that level and you throw the average fastball, the starting pitcher is like 93, 94. They have about 4 plus pitches, 3 to 4. They can do that consistently every 5 days, 60 to 80 pitches for a full, how long is the season? 4 or 5 months? 130 some games? 162. So think about that, 160 something games, 93, 94, 3 to 4 plus pitches every 5 days. What's the major league, what's the average salary of a starting pitcher? It's probably like 5 or 6 million. All that kind of sounded easy until you heard the salary. And you're like, wow, that must be harder than I think if they're willing to pay you $5 to $6 million. What did Scherzer make this year? And the best one can make $40 million a year. So you think it's easy to throw 93, 94 with 4 plus pitches every 5 days for 160 games? You think that's easy? It's probably one of the hardest things to do in the world. How many other sports can you get paid $40 million a year? What? Name another sport that you can get $40 million a year. How many guys on a team is getting $40 million a year? Okay, so basketball might have it. What other sport? I don't think 40 got. Football doesn't have 40 million a year. Who got 40? He just got 40. Probably the first. No way.
500 for 10 years.
Yeah, he's 500 for 10 years.
Yeah, that's the highest one, right? All right. So each sport probably has it, but how many guys are getting it in each sport? Right. So it's just like the quarterback's skill, just like the forward skill in basketball, the pitcher's skill in baseball. These are the elite skills, right? And those making that kind of money, you can count them on your hand. And then how many people are competing for that same spot? It's like winning the lottery, right? Okay. So we tend to underestimate how hard it is, right? Pitching is the fastest human movement ever recorded in the laboratory. Okay, so you're actually trying to do something that at the highest level is some of the highest paid salaries in all of sports, and you're trying to do something that would make you the fastest moving body part. Internal rotation speeds have been recorded up to 7,200 degrees or 7,000 degrees per second. That means your arm can spin around 21 times in 1 second. So you're trying to be the fastest athlete in the world. Right? So you're up against real tough stuff right here. You've asked for a lot. Okay, so underestimating it is going to be pretty common, and it would not be advisable. And I'm hoping in your evaluation process and you learning the science, you start realizing the reality of the challenges you're up against. Because if you don't realize that, you're going to underestimate your training. It means you're not going to push yourself hard enough. You're not going to learn enough. You're not going to apply yourself enough. And then more than likely, you're not going to meet your expectation, which that's frustrating. So we need to really make sure we understand what we're up against, because then we'll hopefully overestimate than underestimate, okay? All right, that being said, let's go more into the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do. At the end of the day, we're trying to get 100 miles an hour force behind this ball. That's what the simplicity of you guys coming here. It's like, coach, help me push 100 miles per hour force behind this ball, right? And then two, once I get there, can you help me understand spin axis so I can dictate where the ball's going to go? Can you help me better command where the force is being pushed? Can you help me then make sure I can build pitches off of that release point, right? All things that you really want to do at an elite level. So what do we have to do to get 100 miles per hour to that force to that ball, still allow me to do all those other things, is we're going to have to use this body really well, right? Fastest human movement ever recorded in the laboratory. So you're asking me, how do I take a human body and I push it to the highest movement, the fastest speed of all the sports? It's going to take a lot of principles here. It's going to take a lot of understanding the physics of how to do this. Weston, go get the whip. I think it was in that basket. So there's two core principles to this up front. It's we've got to peak and optimize ground force, or what I would call potential energy. When I say ground force, do y'all know what I mean? Forces out of the ground. How come forces come out of the ground? How do we know this? How do we know forces come out of the ground? What? Right. There's this. It's gravity, right? We call it gravity, and this interaction we have with the Earth, this mass, and that it's pulling us down, right? It's constantly pulling us down. It's pulling us closer to it, and if we push away from it, we actually can propel ourselves against those forces to jump, right? And obviously, the more forces I push down, the more forces come up. They're typically equal, right? And those are forces that get into my body that I can use to get to this ball, right? So at the end of the day, how hard is it going to be getting this ball to go 100 miles an hour if I don't use the ground? How hard is that going to be? Probably impossible, right? But let's see how well you understand ground force. Am I creating ground force right now? Okay. How much? I weigh 225 pounds. How much ground force am I creating right now? 225 pounds. That's why I'm not moving, right? What would happen if I stopped creating ground force right now? Let me go ahead. What would happen if I shut off my production, my force production right now? How would I do that? Yeah. So if someone hit me with a tranquilizer, I'd be like, because all my muscles stop firing, right? So to stand up, your muscles are actually firing, right? So to now propel ourselves off the ground, what do I have to do to my muscles? I have to push more force out of them, to push more force into the ground, to push more force against my body weight, and then what happens? I go up, right? So when we stride, are we propelling, are we coming off the ground? Are we propelling forces up off the ground when we stride? Yeah, because my leg, when I land, my leg eventually comes to here when it was over there. So I had to propel, linearly jump to do that, right? I had to push above my body weight to move my body away from where I started, right? So we're actually doing that, but we're doing that not up, right? We're doing that more towards the target, right? It's kind of like a vertical jump to a broad jump. Vertical jump, I jump up. A broad jump, I jump forward, right? So we know with the vertical jump and a broad jump, we both have to create forces over our body, but what allows us to direct those forces differently? What allows us to do that? So I'm going to go push force in the ground to propel my body somewhere, but I want to direct it towards the target. What do I have to do? How do I change the angle of that force? So shifting my weight, is that going to do it? We're going to have to align the force vector. The force vector is the line, the direction of force. What is the force vector in the human body? What's our force vector, or vectors in the human body? What? The shin. The shin, because the closest thing to the ground, the feet, is where the force is going to hit the body first. And then when the forces start moving through the body, they're going to go through that shin. And that shin is it's a pole, and it's going to direct those forces along through that shin. So if that shin is here, where are those forces going to go? That way. And if that shin is here, where are the forces going to go? So the shin is like our scope to directing our forces. That's why it's our force vector. So if we want to take our forces off, propel our forces through our body and take it that way, where does my shin have to go? Down, right? And if my shin doesn't go down when I'm pitching, what happens? Then your forces, I mean, you can fall. There's other ways to direct it, but you really don't direct the propulsion forces that way. So how many guys in their pitching career have learned to align their force vectors to direct more ground force towards their target? Raise your hand if coaches have taught you how to align your force vectors to direct your ground force towards the target. Right. Why not? Too much anecdotal training, right? So the point is, that's what we have to learn. We're going to have to learn not only how to get more force in the ground, which is flexion extension, that's how we push force in the ground, but how to then aim those forces where we want it to go. Where do we want it to go? If this is the rubber, I want it to go to my release point out here to the ball. So I have to take the forces in the only leg on the ground. I have to pump force into the ground so it comes back. I have to then direct it in a linear direction so when it starts coming up my body, I can direct it to behind that ball to get the forces I want behind that ball. Okay? So the initial movement is going to be lifting, falling forward and down the same rate, aligning your force vector before propulsion, before drive, before triple extension, so we can build ground forces towards the direction of the ball. That's why when you take guys in my little free course I do online and you show them how to fall and line their force vector and then drive, they're all like, I'm throwing like 5 miles an hour harder. I'm like, yeah. Because you've never learned to direct ground forces towards the target, towards the ball. Now you have more forces moving to the ball, you throw harder. Pretty simple, right? Okay, so that would be the first thing that you really want to learn. How do I get more forces in my body, and most importantly, how do I get them directed towards my release point? Because more than likely, I'm not going to want to put them in my body, the ball. I'm just not going to do it. So that would be a good first step, okay? And that's a lot of what we do today when we get into the medicine ball drills. From there, now we got energy in our body. And there's going to be another opportunity when our front foot lands, it's going to push back. And it's funneling this energy up. Studies show the back leg propels the energy into the body, or in the proximal segments, and the front leg pumps the energy out of the body, or into the distal segments. So that's what we've got to learn. We've got to learn how to pump energy in, pump energy out. You're not going to pump energy in and pump energy out if you don't know how to, if you don't have the power to do it, if you don't know how to load your center of mass to do it, and if you don't know how to direct the forces to where you want it to go, you're not going to do any of that. So the better we get at that, the more energy we put into our bodies, which potentially is the more energy that'll come out of our bodies. So up front, that's what we got to do. Then from there, we go from ground force to kinetic energy. What is kinetic energy? It's energy in the kinetic chain. What is the kinetic chain? It's all the joints connecting each other through each segment, making this chain link. And because of that, each segment is influencing the next. If you want the femur to go forward, drive the tibia. If you want the trunk to go forward, drive the femur or the pelvis. If you want the arm to go forward, drive the trunk. That's the kinetic chain, right? When you start working with kinetic energy, now it's about amplifying energy that you have. It's taking the energy you have and trying to amplify it. As opposed in the legs, it was trying to create energy that you don't even have. It was going and getting it, gathering it. Now it's in the body. Now can we amplify the energy? This is how we amplify energy. The whip is a great example of amplifying energy. Look, if I take this whip and I just spin it in one direction, you can kind of hear it breaking through the wind a little bit. You hear that? Okay. Now, if I take the same amount of energy, or maybe even less, but I change the direction of how it moves, I amplify the energy, right? What was that noise? Anybody know what that noise was? It was the tip of this breaking the sound barrier. So what happens when you break the sound barrier? It explodes, right? Well, it wasn't a big object doing it. It was a little bitty object doing it, but it created that noise. So how does the whip go from breaking the wind to changing direction and breaking the sound barrier? What caused it to accelerate so much faster? What caused it, what allowed it to take that initial energy put into the handle and accelerate it faster than the speed of sound? Changing direction. Counter movements. The moment you made it change direction, you told the whip, you now are going to have to move at the same speed that I did this, but you're going to have to move the same force faster, because this change of direction makes it have to accelerate quicker to keep up with the handle. So you said take the same energy, change the direction, and now you got to move faster to keep up with the handle. All right? And that amplifies it. So that change of direction, that counter movement, forces an acceleration. Can you do that pitching? Where's the first big counter movement in the pitching delivery? Hip to shoulder, right? What's the change of direction? The hips going forward as the trunk loads back. Now the upper body's got to catch up. Studies show more hip to shoulder separation, strong correlation to faster trunk speeds. We saw it happen right there, okay? So how do I optimize that movement? I got to optimize it first and the distance I create, right? Distance gives me more time. Time gives me more potential to accelerate, okay? My favorite analogy is take two runways with two F-18 jets. F-18 jets have to go like 165 miles an hour to get that big chunk of metal off the ground. If you had 1,500 foot on this runway and 300 foot on this runway, which jet's getting off the ground? The bigger runway, the longer runway. There's actually, I've had an aviation guy in here, they can do the math based on its ability to accelerate. They know the amount of distance it needs to get there. If it doesn't have that distance, it never gets to that speed. It doesn't have enough time to accelerate. So distance is time to accelerate. But then today, these are F-18s. You might not be an F-18. So just because you have the distance doesn't mean you can accelerate. Like, it was fun doing that with them, you two, right? You had a longer trunk path. No, you had a longer trunk path, but you were moving slower. He had a shorter trunk path, and he was moving faster. You're just playing that game. Ideally, you'd want a longer trunk path moving faster. You'll by far beat him. So you're playing the game of distance and acceleration, okay? Ideally, you want as much distance to get as much acceleration as you can get. But for example, eventually the F-18, for example, if I took like a single engine plane, maybe it's got to go 140 miles an hour. You could give it 6,000 feet of runway. It's probably not going to get much more than 140 miles an hour. So half of the end runway is not even being used, right? And a lot of times in our effort, if we try to gain too much distance, we might lose leverage to accelerate through it, and sometimes it'll actually slow us down, okay? So you're always playing that game. But the point is, with the counter movement, the more time we can give it, the better chance we can optimize and accelerate through it. Because the ability for the trunk to stay back to allow the hips go forward gives the hips more time to accelerate, right? And more than likely, you might have the ability to accelerate more, but you don't have the mobility to give it the time. So a lot of you will just improve your mobility and your velocities are going to go up. Not everybody, but some of you are just going to get in here and do our mobility program and you're going to gain 5 miles an hour. Right? That could happen in 2 weeks, a week. Some of you are going to gain the mobility, but you're still not fast, so you're not going to use it. Then you're going to have to go out and get faster. Now you're faster and you got more mobility. Now your velocity starts going up. See how this works? This is just science, guys. And because there's so many variables here, it allows you to have so many different types of pitchers. Tall pitchers, short pitchers, fat pitchers, skinny pitchers. Because we're not all just trying to do one thing. We're all trying to do many different things. We're trying to move faster, more time, better sequencing. There's many ways to get to 100, but ideally, the more ways you can use, the better chance you get there, right? So in the counter movement aspect of it, how well, raise your hand if you were optimizing your first counter movement, hip to shoulder separation, raise your hand. That's great news. When you actually learn how to optimize it, what do you think is going to happen to all you guys in here? You're going to throw harder. So everyone has great potential to come out of here throwing harder. If you don't apply these principles, are you going to throw harder? No. If you kind of apply these principles, you can throw harder? Maybe. But if you really apply these principles well, there's a good chance you can throw a lot harder. Okay? So it is up to how well you learn this and understand this and apply this. Okay? So what's the second counter movement? We have a real great counter movement between the hips and shoulders. And the trunk loading back is an application for the hips to get more time to accelerate. Well, what's the next opportunity to use the counter movement? And what else? So counter movement is 2 movements. What are the 2 movements? One is your arm. What's the other movement? Trunk. Mainly the trunk moving forward and the arm moving back. There's actually another one too, but let's just talk about that one. The trunk moving forward, the arm moving back. The arm lays back. It allows the trunk to go farther forward, right? That's really why you want your arm to lay back. You don't want your arm to lay back so you can increase its runway to accelerate. You really want to let the arm to lay back to increase the trunk's runway to accelerate, because 86% of the energy to the ball came from the trunk. So I'm a little bit more focused on increasing the trunk's ability to accelerate than the arm. And if you fail to drive the trunk and you have to overcompensate for the arm, once again, you'll learn how inefficient it is to use your arm to accelerate. For example, Kibler and Chandler, 2 scientists, calculated a 20% decrease in the energy you pump from the ground up through the hips and trunk to the arm. If you decrease that energy coming up by 20%, you have to overcompensate by 34% in the rotational velocity of the shoulder just to put the same force in the ball. So you lose 20% of your energy coming up. You don't have to make up for it with 20% of your arm. You have to make up with 34% of your arm. That's almost double. So how valuable is the kinetic energy coming up? Super valuable. That's all you should care about. Who cares about the arm? Most of the energy going to the ball is not even coming from the arm. But the arm's job is to allow that energy to come up. Yeah, the arm can cut it off. The arm can disrupt it. So you want the arm to do its best job to allow the kinetic energy to come up. So we already learned that the arm needs to lay back to allow the trunk to go forward. Well, the trunk had to rotate. What allows the trunk to rotate? What arm movement allows the trunk to rotate? What arm movement did we measure in you that allows the trunk to rotate? Horizontal abduction. So this one allows the trunk to go forward. Notice it goes back, trunk goes forward. This one goes back horizontally to allow the trunk to rotate around. So for example, if I just landed here and I didn't load my scap, I kept my elbow here and I cocked my arm. When I went into trunk rotation, my arm would release before my trunk fully rotated. But if I fully load my arm into my scap load and I cock my arm back, now my trunk can go farther before release. So this is giving more distance for the trunk to rotate. Same as when I open up, my arm going back now allows my trunk to go farther forward before release, funneling more energy to the ball. Why is it important, besides the fact that we have to double our energy with the arm? Why else is it important that we funnel energy to the arm and the arm doesn't create the energy? What? Well, yeah, it's going to destroy us probably. What else? There's some other important things to it. Well, if the arm is having to try to use itself, flexion, pronation, if it's trying to force that and it doesn't destroy itself, how well is it going to control the pitch and create movement if it's using those muscles to generate forces? So how well are you going to command your pitches if you're trying to use your arm to generate forces? So if your arm's staying relaxed and just riding and funneling energy, now it's got a better chance that it can fine-tune release points and grip the ball to create movements, right? So if I said to you, based on the studies, what level of the game puts the least amount of internal rotation torque on their arm? That's this stress. Which level of the game puts the least amount of this force on their arm? Youth, high school, college, or professional? Which one puts the least amount of stress when you normalize it for body weight? Meaning body weight can drive more internal rotation torques. When you say based on their body weight, who puts the least amount of torques on the arm? Which level? What? Professional, by far. They put less torques on the arm based on their body weight than youth pitchers. Why do you think that's happening? For all those reasons. Less stress, easier to control and create movement, more longevity through a career at a higher velocity. There's another study that showed youth, high school, college, professional. Youth to high school, they use less arm speeds in high school than youth, and they throw harder. High school to college, arm speeds went up, ball speed went up. But college to professional, ball speeds went down, or arm speeds went down, ball speeds went up. How does that happen? How does arm speeds go down, internal rotation velocity goes down, but ball speed goes up? How does that happen? Better counter movements, funneling energy to the ball. When you have less counter movements, your arm has to overcompensate. That typically is what holds you back from your success in the career, because more than likely it leads to injury, and you're not as efficient in your ability to command and control the ball. So think about it. The name of the game is, especially college professional, if you want to go college professional, you have to put less stress on your arm with less arm speeds, which will give you the less stress, at higher velocities. That's what you have to do. So if you really want to develop yourself at that level, your training should constantly focus on funneling more energy through the kinetic chain to take the stress off your arm, to allow you to increase your performance. How many programs out there, approaches out there, is training you to slow your arm down, pick your ball speeds up, and do that more consistently? How many programs out there are doing that? What are they doing? What? They're trying to speed your arm up and build iron scaps to survive it, right? And do you wonder why we have a high amount of arm injury in this sport? Raise your hand if you've ever severely hurt your arm or you know someone who has. I tore my rotator cuff at 18 years old. So that's what led me on this mission, because it got me back to playing pro ball. But more importantly, it allowed me to help future generations. And I'll guarantee you right now, anecdotally, I would say the reason we have so much injury is because there's such a poor understanding of how to do this at all levels of the game. Okay? But it's not anymore. It's in the science now. You ignore it now, then you're just stubborn are ignorant, right? So this is the name of the game, guys, because we know there's a real threat in this game to not get injured if we're going to make it, right? Because we're having to push so hard, get our velos so high, and in that process, so think about it, the reason we're trying to get our velocities up is because we want to play this game at a higher level for longer periods of time. We basically want to increase our career, right? We don't want to, at 18, have to hang up the game because we weren't good enough to play college. And we don't want to hang it up in college because we weren't good enough to play pro. And we know that what gets us through that is throwing harder with better spin and better command and better health. So the problem is, if the first step we take to throw harder, it wound up destroying our arm, what was the purpose? Because the reason you wanted to throw harder is so you had more opportunity to play, but in the process of doing that, you killed all your opportunity to play. So think how stupid it is to try to improve your performance at the same time in considerably increasing your risk to actually stay healthy enough to play the game. Okay? So we got to be smart because we can fall down that path very quickly, right? And even though we understand it here, doesn't mean it's easy. It's very, very challenging to do. It's a lot easier to think your arm speeds are going to get you to the big leagues than to sit here and think, well, a better kinetic chain is going to get me to the big leagues. Okay? All right. Any questions on that? So right now we're going to bounce up, moving around a little bit, and we're going to start going through the med throws. So the med ball routines are the foundation of our biomechanical training. We're going to teach you the drills and the importance of the drills and how the drills are an application to apply the core principles. Then tomorrow, this will take us to the end of the day, tomorrow you'll come in nutrition with Dr. Pat, and you'll go over nutritional planning, supplementation. Then we'll go into mobility. Francisco will take you through mobility. That starts you improving your mobility problems. Then I'll take you into the lifting. That'll go through you enhancing your power, speed, strength, and motor control. And then we'll break for lunch tomorrow, and then we'll go back into the med balls, and we'll have a little competition with the med balls. It gets fun. Because today is just learning. Today is a lot of frustration. Tomorrow will be a little success, a little competition, and then we'll take it into the baseballs. Because the goal is the med balls are teaching us way better than a baseball can teach us. And what we're learning from the med balls, we want to transition into the same drills with the baseballs, the same things we're learning. And then we want to see that over time progress, and then we'll show you how it moves to the mound. And then we'll do a program walkthrough to make sure we know how to follow the program, so when we come in here on Monday, or you're on your own on Monday, you know where you're starting, and you know how you're progressing through all the training.
Just say something to the people.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thanks for them chiming in. That's good.
Still don't know where to train this summer?
¿Estás listo para este verano?